Hello and welcome. I'm Ankit and this is the Daily News Simplified. Now in today's DNS, that is 29th of February, it is an extra day because 2024 is a leap year. Hence we'll cover leap years today as well in addition to 7 different articles. So you can see the screenshot that we are going to cover 8 important articles of the day. And without further ado, let us straight begin with our first article of the day. But before beginning, let me emphasize the need to like, share and subscribe the video because your appreciation goes a long way in keeps us motivated. Hence, with this, we'll start off with the first article of the day, which you can see appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Now, every now and then, you must be noticing that there's an article on manufacturing of semiconductors in India, be it our Prime Minister or our Union IT Minister, and in today's case, it was Secretary of Ministry of Information and Technology. Now, he has highlighted that domestic production of semiconductors will be a next big thing for India. Now, this topic itself is important from GS Paper 3 perspective because it highlights changes in industrial policy and their effects on industrial growth. Now, semiconductors being an important part of day-to-day activities, it is very much important as far as Indian manufacturing is concerned. Also, government has been trying to increase the manufacturing of semiconductors in India. So in that way, it requires changes in industrial policy. Also, the sector that is manufacturing in India, it is important from mains perspective. Let me tell you that in the mains this year, a question appeared on faster economic growth and what is required to increase the share of manufacturing sector in the country. Hence, this topic is important and very much important from mains perspective. But before going into detail, let me first highlight what is this semiconductor manufacturing and who are the major players. Now, the semiconductor manufacturing, it is currently concentrated on very handful of countries. For example, the major players United States, South Korea, Japan, as well as Taiwan. But it is also important to note that Taiwan, it dominates the manufacturing of semiconductors because overall Taiwan is responsible for almost 60% of semiconductors produced worldwide. But when it comes to advanced semiconductors, Taiwan produces as much as 90% of semiconductors. So you can understand that the production of semiconductors right now is concentrated only in a handful of few countries in addition to China, but is severely concentrated, especially with respect to advanced semiconductors in Taiwan. But there were few changes, geopolitical and other changes that resulted into crunch of supply of these semiconductors. For example, you must be knowing that US and China, they were involved what was called a trade war. So in that war, US and China, they imposed restrictions on each other. For example, US, it brought Chips for All Act, which incentivized companies to set up their manufacturing units in US, and in addition, it imposed some restrictions on Chinese supply chain. So in retaliation, what China did was that it imposed sanctions on US and its allies, and it restricted the exports of important commodities such as germanium and gallium. Now these two metals, they are used as a raw material for semiconductor manufacturing. So naturally, when supply of raw materials were constrained, it naturally led to disruption in supply of semiconductors across the world. Now this situation, it was further exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. Because during COVID-19 pandemic, we witnessed large scale lockdowns. And because of these lockdowns, the semiconductor manufacturing units all over the world, they shut down. So not just because of trade war, but also due to COVID-19 restrictions, the supply of semiconductors across the world, they were affected. So you can understand that an important commodity like semiconductors, when the supply is affected, it has a multiplier effect across the world. So let us see where India comes in as far as semiconductors are concerned. First of all, the market size of semiconductor in India, it is currently quite large, and it is expected to grow as much as 3 times by year 2024 and 25 to approximately $70 billion market. Now this market, India currently it designs almost 2000 semiconductor chips per year. And also, as far as R&Ds are concerned, major companies like Qualcomm and Intel, they have their R&D centers located in India. Therefore, as much as $2.5 billion worth of research and development activities, it is currently conducted in India. But is it enough? That is the India semiconductor industry enough to meet the domestic demand? The answer is no. Because as much as 100% of our total semiconductor requirement, India is dependent on imports. And out of total imports, 37% of these imports, they are sourced from just one country, that is China. So you can understand the situation as far as meeting the domestic demand is concerned, it is quite precarious in India. So that is why India is trying to manufacture these semiconductors in India itself. Because there are multiple reasons. Let us understand these reasons in the next slide. Now, establishing a semiconductor manufacturing unit in India, it is quite significant from multiple angles. First of all, as far as economic and industrial growth is concerned, it has a multiplier effect on the economy. Let me tell you how. First of all, right now you understand that India has a huge import bill because it has to import all the semiconductors from outside. Now, but when we start manufacturing them inside India, our import bill will reduce. Hence, it will lead to lower of current account deficit in the country, which is quite huge. Now again, manufacturing of semiconductors in India will create more jobs because more and more people will be involved in the manufacturing process. It will lead to increased taxation income for the country, and it will also lead to increased infrastructure development because establishing an industry requires logistics, supply chain, again requires creation of infrastructure. Therefore, this establishing semiconductors in India, it will have a multiplier effect in terms of creation of jobs, increase in taxation income for the government, increasing in infrastructural creation, and it will also reduce our import bill, which will eventually lead to lowering of our current account deficit. Now also it is important from national security perspective. How? Because most of the important sectors like telecom, defense, as well as power transmission, these sectors they employ or use extensively the semiconductors. But also these are called critical infrastructure or critical sectors, which are important for national security perspective. Hence, any company who wants to establish telecom, defense, or power transmission infrastructure, they require their systems to be foolproof. So when you source these semiconductors from domestic sources which are manufactured in India itself, then you can increase the security of these critical infrastructure sectors. Hence, establishing semiconductors, it is also important from national security perspective. Now, there's also a geopolitical angle for establishing a domestic industry. Because, as you know, India and China, they are involved in a border dispute. This is one angle of India and China relation. But there's also another angle, that is trade. Because as I highlighted in the previous slide, India is dependent on China to import as much as 37% of its semiconductor requirements. So you can see that this huge import from China, it gives China the leverage over India. Now China, in its discussions with India related to border dispute, it can utilize this leverage as far as trade and semiconductor trade is concerned, and can say to India that please accept our proposals, otherwise we'll stop your supply of semiconductors. So naturally, if India is able to manufacture these semiconductors inside its own territory, it will reduce the leverage of China, and it will give India the upper hand in its day-to-day transactions with China. So you understand that establishing a domestic semiconductor industry, it is important from geopolitical angle as well. Now let us move to the necessity to establish what is called a supply chain resilience. Now again, in the previous slide I highlighted that you require the supply of semiconductors for many industries, be it automobile, electronics, as well as other industries. And when the supply is disrupted, as we saw in COVID-19 pandemic, it also has a multiplier effect on other sectors. So to produce everything domestically and at an optimum time, you require a resilient supply chain, which you can ensure by establishing the industry in the domestic territory only. Further, India is also looking to demonstrate its technological leadership as far as information and communication technology is concerned. Because in our day-to-day life, right from mobile phones to agriculture, you require semiconductors across all levels. And this is what is known as industrial level 4.0. So to demonstrate its leadership, India has to manufacture the key component of electronics, that is semiconductors, inside its own territory. Hence, from not just economic, national security or geopolitical perspective, but manufacturing semiconductors in India, it is also important from this perspective of supply chain resilience as well as demonstrating the technological leadership. And in this regard, government has brought forward many schemes. First of all is National Policy of Electronics, which was brought in 2019. And in this scheme, what government did was that it established that India has to play a key role or has to become what is known as a global hub for electronics system design manufacturing sector. And in this regard, the government, it brought what is known as scheme for promotion of manufacturing of electronic components and semiconductors, which is known as spec scheme. And under this scheme, government is offering 25% of incentives on capital expenditure as far as establishing semiconductors industries are concerned. And on similar lines, India brought what is known as Modified Semicon India program. And under this program, government is extending incentives to company for establishing semiconductor manufacturing units, display fabrication units, and other compound semiconductors. And this scheme is implemented by India's Semiconductor Mission, which comes under Ministry of Information and Technology. Now, under this very scheme, you can hear there are many companies like Micron Technologies as well as Tower Technologies. They have filed their application under this particular scheme itself. Also important in this regard is India's deal with US, which was known as Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies deal. Because as you can understand, US is a key player as far as semiconductors are concerned. And this deal that India has signed with US, it will enable India to transfer technologies from US as far as manufacturing of semiconductors are concerned. So these are four most important initiatives that Indian government has taken to promote the manufacturing of semiconductors in India itself. But is it that easy? The answer is no. Because manufacturing of semiconductors in any country face number of challenges. What are these challenges? Let us find out. The first and probably the most prohibitive challenge is that the establishment cost of any semiconductor unit is quite high, because any semiconductor unit, it requires almost 5 to 7 billion dollars to establish an industry, which is a quite a huge amount. So naturally, you can understand only large corporate players, they are only able to establish these semiconductor industries. Also, these semiconductors industry, they have a very long gestation period. So once you start investing in a country, and right from investing to manufacturing of semiconductors, it can take as much as 5 years in total. So this long gestation period from investment to start of manufacturing is quite large. Hence, it takes quite a lot of time to meet what is known as demand supply mismatch. Also, there are several delays in implementation of these semiconductor units, because these semiconductor units to establish, they have to acquire land. Hence, they may face issues related to land acquisition. Also, these semiconductor manufacturing units, they need infrastructure to function, which is continuous supply of electricity as well as water. So providing these facilities, it also takes time, thereby adding to delays in establishing of the industries itself. Because as I've already highlighted, infrastructural requirements of establishing a semiconductor industry, it is quite high, because it requires continuous supply of water as well as electricity. Hence, any government, it will take time to provide these facilities to semiconductor industries. Also, India currently is witnessing shortage of highly skilled workforce, because this industry, it requires highly skilled workforce, because any workforce who wants to be employed in these industries, they should have knowledge of not just physics as well as electronics. Also, what we have witnessed, that manufacturing ecosystem as far as semiconductor is concerned, it is not that developed in India, because to manufacture semiconductors, you require highly purified argon gas as well as chips, which is made from silicon, and this silicon is highly purified. So all these raw materials, they required to be sourced to manufacture any semiconductor. But currently, the demands for these raw materials in India, it has to be completed as through imports. Thereby, in India, the manufacturing ecosystem of semiconductors, it is currently absent, and this creates hurdle in establishing a semiconductor industry in India. So what should be the way forward in order to promote semiconductor manufacturing in India? And with this, let us come to the first point, that is the need to develop ecosystem, because these semiconductors, they have to be manufactured in India, and we require source of raw materials for them. So to manufacture semiconductor, you have to first be dependent on raw material, which is again sourced from a domestic country, and these semiconductors should then be sent to assembly units, which is another factory required for electronics assembly. So not just the back end, but also you have to ensure the front end ecosystem for a proper semiconductor industry in the country. And this ecosystem, it requires highly skilled workforce. Hence, in order to promote semiconductor industry in India, most industries, they need to collaborate with academia in the country, because it is only the colleges in India which will provide these industries with a highly skilled workforce, and these workforce can then utilize their skills to manufacture semiconductors. Again, in this regard, we require to incentivize industry as far as to compensate on their capital expenditures, as well as promote or establish infrastructure that is required for their day-to-day activity. Hence, we need to incentivize these industries through capital expenditure subsidies as well as establish necessary infrastructure, that is water and electricity. Also, manufacturing semiconductor is not just an activity that can take place entirely in a country. And in this regard, you need to create like-minded partnership with friendly countries like US, Taiwan, as well as Japan. Because as I've already highlighted, these are dominant players in the semiconductor industry. And when you have partnership with these players, it will help you achieve the necessary technology which is required currently. Also, it is important to attract major foreign companies such as TSMC of Taiwan as well as Micron Semiconductors of United States, because these are the major players in the semiconductor industry and they have a huge backlog of orders. So when they establish their domestic manufacturing inside India, it will act as a source of attraction for smaller players. Understood? So because of the need for ecosystem development, creation of skilled workforce, incentivizing industry through capital expenditure, encouraging partnership with like-minded countries and attracting foreign companies is an ideal way forward as far as semiconductors in India are concerned. This was all for today's discussion on semiconductor, and with this we move to second article of the day, which as you can see appeared in the Business Line newspaper. Now this newspaper or this particular article, it highlights that India is establishing a new spaceport in Kulasekarapattinam, which is in Tamil Nadu. Now this spaceport, it will be exclusively for launch of small satellite launch vehicles which will launch micro or nano satellites. Now this is an important development as far as India's space industry is concerned, thereby making it important from GS paper 3 perspective, which underscores the importance of awareness in the field of space. Further, question related to India's space program has been asked in mains of the year 2019. So as you can see, this topic is important from GS paper 3 syllabus. Now, why is India establishing a spaceport in the east coast of India? There has to be some reason, right? Let us find out that now there are two reasons for locating any spaceport across the world. Because as you can see, even France launches its space objects from not France but in Guyana, which is located in South America. So this highlights that most of the spaceports in the country, they are located on the eastern side of the seacoast. Understood? And most importantly, these spaceports, they are located close to equator, because Earth, as you can see, it has a rotational velocity, because Earth itself, it rotates from west to east. Now this rotational velocity, it is highest near the equator and it reduces as we move northwards or southwards. Now this rotational velocity, it is almost zero near poles, and this velocity, it is highest near equator. Now when satellites, they are launched close to equator, not just the velocity of the launch vehicles, but there's also the velocity of Earth's rotational speed, it is added to the satellites. Thereby any satellite which is launched close to equator, it requires less fuel, which saves ultimately the cost of the space mission. Hence you can see, with less amount of fuel, when the satellite is located close to equator, it can gain higher speed with less amount of fuel. Now also you can see that most of the spaceports across the world, it is located close to east coast of the country. Even India's premier spaceport, that is Sriharikota, it is located on the east coast in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Because when a satellite is launched from east coast, it will move along with Earth's rotational velocity towards east. And towards east, you can see there's a Bay of Bengal. So any mishap, if it were to happen, the satellite will then drop itself in the Bay of Bengal itself, which again is a water body, thereby there is no harm to life. But on the other hand, if I say the satellites were to launch from west coast of India, then that satellite has to move over India's mainland, which again, in case of mishap, will be a risk to the local population. Hence, to avoid risk to local population, most of the satellites are launched from the east coast in the country. But there's also a challenge with respect to Sriharikota Space Center. Because any polar satellite, when it is launched from Sriharikota, it has to take what is known as a dogleg maneuver. And in this dogleg maneuver, the satellite has to move across the Sri Lanka to avoid Sri Lankan mainland. And this entails additional cost on the space mission, because the spacecraft has to carry additional fuel to perform this maneuver, thus adding to the cost of the entire space mission. So to save cost, especially with relation to small satellites, because weight is of critical essence in these small satellite launch vehicles, therefore India has established or is trying to establish a new spaceport deep in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. Because when a satellite which will be launched from this new spaceport, it will avoid completely the Sri Lankan mainland, thereby saving the fuel cost which is otherwise required to perform this dogleg maneuver. Hence, the location of east coast is important as far as launch of polar satellites are concerned, and as far as launch of geostationary satellites are concerned, they are launched at close proximity with the equator. Because Earth's rotational velocity, it is added to the launch or velocity of space vehicles. Hence, you can understand that satellites which is launched close to equator, it can gain high speed at a less fuel cost. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on satellites or India's newest spaceport, which is located in Kulasekarapattinam. Now let us move to a related article which again appeared in the Business Line newspaper. Now this article, it highlights that India recently has given approval for FDI in space. Now this approval is related to automatic approval, which is known otherwise as automatic route. Because FDI, which is undertaken under automatic route, it is not required to take permission from any government agency. And in this regard, government has increased the quantum of percentage which is required otherwise to take automatic route. For example, as much as 49% of FDI in launch vehicles, as an establishment of spaceport is concerned, it can be through automatic route. Now this percentage of automatic route is 74% in case of manufacturing of satellites. Now as far as ground stations is concerned, and subcomponents or subsystems which is required for manufacturing of satellites, in this field government has allowed 100% of FDI under automatic route. So you can see through this liberalization of economy, India or Indian government, it is looking to increase the private sector participation and also increase the investment in space sector. Now again, this question, it is important from mains perspective, because in mains 2014 a question appeared on foreign direct investment in the defense sector. So by liberalizing the space sector, India is looking not just to increase the private sector participation but also increase the foreign investment. Now, why is there a need to encourage foreign investment in the Indian space sector? Because of multiple reasons. First is that India wants to increase its share in the global space market, which currently is about $500 to $600 billion in size. Now, out of this total space market, India's share currently is close to 2%, which you can understand is quite less. Now, India wants to increase this global share to 9%. So, quite understandably, this increased share, it will again, this increased share will require developed space industry in country. And currently, most of the space work in the country, it is performed by what is known as India Space Research Organization only. So, not just increasing the share in global space market, India also wants to meet its domestic demand, which you can see is from many sectors. Because, for example, earlier when you used to travel, you used to ask the directions or address from a nearest panwala or chaiwala. But now what you do? You open the mobile, you open Google Maps and you explore satellite based navigation, which navigates you through various cauldrons in the streets and enables you to reach your final location. And how is this possible? It is possible through range of navigational satellites. And this is just one example that I have told you. Also, there are many other sectors such as agriculture, which require use of space-based assets such as satellites to estimate the amount of produce. So, not just for navigational purposes, but also agricultural purposes, there has been an increase in demand as far as space-based activities are concerned. Now, to fulfill all this domestic and foreign demand, India's ISRO will have to grow by 10 times, which you can understand is not possible in the current circumstances. So, to meet the domestic demand and to also meet the foreign demand, India wants to increase the private sector participation in the space industry. Because not just private sector participation will help meet domestic demand, but will also help innovate in many sectors in the country. Because private sector primarily, that is Tesla or SpaceX, it is responsible for supplying of goods to International Space Station. Now this SpaceX is a private sector entity. So you can understand in global markets, private sector has played a key role as far as development in space industry is concerned. And government of India, it wants to create SpaceX in the Indian industries as well. So not just meeting domestic demand, India also wants to increase the private sector participation in Indian space sector. And increasing private sector participation, it will also enable India's space agency, that is ISRO, to perform its strategic objectives. What are these strategic objectives? India or ISRO, it wants to conduct exoplanetary exploration. That is, ISRO, it wants to send its probe to other planets as well. Also, as you can understand, yesterday ISRO also wants to send humans into space. Now these are strategic objectives of ISRO. So ISRO wants to increase the time that it is giving to these strategic objectives. And how it can do? Only after the private sector, it actively participates in the India space sector. So there's a necessity to increase investment in the Indian space sector, which will promote not just private sector participation, but it will also bring more innovation in India's space sector. Now, with this, let us move to the next article of the day, which you can see appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Now, this article, which appeared in text and context section, it highlights issues related to vertical devolution of funds. Now, before going into detail, let me give you a brief overview of how funds are devolved in the Indian polity. Now, Indian constitution, it provides distribution of powers between various levels of government. For example, there's a central government which discharges many functions like national security as well as other important functions such as space exploration. While on the other hand, states in the country, they are responsible for other functions such as policing or establishing law and order. Now these functions, they are exclusively or are of exclusive domain of these respective governments. Now naturally, to perform these functions, these government, they require funds. So therefore, Constitution of India, it also gives these government power to collect taxes. Now naturally, central government, it collects more taxes. Whereas on the other hand, the amount of taxation which is collected by these states are somewhat low when you compare it with central government. So as you can see, there's an imbalance in the India's fiscal federalism. So how you restore the balance? And for this, Article 280 of the Indian Constitution, it provides establishment of what is known as Finance Commission. Now this Finance Commission, it is also known as balancing wheel of India's fiscal federalism. Because on Finance Commission recommendation, the central government, it transfers tax collection or tax money to the state government, which is known as financial devolution. Now this topic of financial devolution and on broader context, fiscal federalism, it is important from GS paper 2 perspective because the syllabus, it directly highlights devolution of powers and finances between various levels of government. Now ideally, Finance Commission gives certain recommendation and the union government, it transfers the net proceed or collection of taxes to the state governments. So there's a central government at the higher level, and at local level or at lower levels, there are state governments. So when the funds are being transferred from union to state, it is known as vertical devolution. While on the other hand, funds are also distributed among states. So one state gets some funds and another state, it gets other share of funds. And this is known as horizontal devolution. So our article, it highlights the issues related to vertical devolution, which means devolution between central government or transfer of tax proceeds from central government to state governments. There are irregularities which today's articles highlight. The first and probably the most important irregularity is the shrinking of divisible pool. Now, let us understand that this pie, it highlights the total collection of tax by the central government and it is known as gross tax revenue. And out of these gross tax revenue, there's a sum share, which means collection of cess, surcharge and money spent in collection of taxes. Now this money which is collected under cess, surcharge and cost used for collection of taxes, it is subtracted from the gross tax revenue. Now again, this gross tax revenue, it collects all the income, corporate and other taxes which are levied by the central government. And it constitutes what is known as gross tax revenue, that is total collection of taxes by the union government. And out of this gross taxation revenue, we deduct the money which is collected in lie of cess, surcharge, and we reduce this money, and this is the remaining part of the gross tax revenue. It is called as net tax revenue, which otherwise is known as net proceeds of taxes. And the Union Finance Commission, it recommends distribution of money between central to state government from this net proceeds of taxes. So you can understand, the more central government collects cess and surcharge, so the lesser will be this net tax revenue, thereby reducing the net tax proceeds. And according to today's article, earlier the total amount of cess and surcharge collected Back in 2013 and 14, it was close to 10% of gross tax revenue. But in the year 2020 to 21, this rose to more than 20% of gross tax revenue. So as you can understand, the increase in cess and surcharge money collected, it has automatically reduced the net tax revenue, which is then utilized to collect how much money should be transferred from union to state government. So this has led to shrinking of divisible pool, and in essence, it means that less money is been given to state governments by the union government. Now, another reason for irregularity in vertical devolution is the rise in tie transfers. Now, how are these tie transfers occur? Now, you can understand that there are centrally sponsored schemes which are financed both by union as well as state governments. Now, the union government, it contributes 60% of the funds, and the state government, it contributes the rest 40% of the funds. But the sole implementation of this centrally sponsored scheme, they are done by state governments. Can state government implement anything? The answer is no. Why? Because union government, it gives direction to state governments on how to implement this scheme. And the funds that are given on implementation, they are tied to various other conditionalities. Thereby, more the conditionalities by the union government, it reduces the autonomy of the state governments. Thereby, the rise in trade transfers has reduced the autonomy of a government, that is state governments. Further, the amount of cess that is collected by the central government, it is credited to the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, from this Consolidated Fund of India, these funds are then shifted to other accounts which are located in the public account of India. Now, according to CAG, the union government, it has not transferred the entire amount that is collected to cess in these small accounts which are constituted under public account of India. For example, center collected money under what was known as health and education cess, and this money should have been transferred to what was called a Prarambhik Shiksha Kosh, which was located in public accounts of India. But as per CAG, only 60% of the total funds that were collected under health and education cess, it was transferred to this Prarambhik Shiksha Kosh. While on the other hand, there was also another cess which was known as research and development cess. And the proceeds of this research and development cess, it has to be relocated into public account of India under a fund called Fund for Technological Development and Application. But the only 9% of the total fund which was under R&D cess, it was transferred to another account which is located in public account of India. So this short transfer of cess, it is also an issue because first of all, government is collecting more and more cess, but on the other hand, it is not transferring these entire cess to the purpose which is actually meant for. So this highlights irregularities in India's vertical devolution. Now with this, let us move to another article of the day, which you can see appeared in the op-ed section of the Hindu newspaper. Now this article, which is written by Shashi Tharoor, it highlights India's fight against rare disease. Now what are these rare disease? These are diseases that affect people, but they are very rare in nature. Now, what are these rare diseases? Is there any standard definition? The answer is no. Because in this regard, the World Health Organization, it categorizes any disease as rare disease if it affects less than 1 out of 100 people. While on the other hand, India, it categorizes any disease as rare disease if it affects less than 100 out of 1 lakh people in total. So you can see, as far as definition is concerned, there is currently a mismatch. But these rare disease, it affects Indians in general in quite huge amount. because India, it accounts for one third of total global burden on rare diseases. And these rare diseases, they are primarily genetic in nature, and thereby it affects mostly children. So the total burden in India as far as rare disease is concerned, it is quite huge, because as many as 8 to 10 crore people in India, they are suffering from these rare diseases. Hence, government should take important steps in order to make the lives of people who are suffering from these rare diseases somewhat better. So this is the crux of the article. Now in this regard, the author, he also highlighted challenges which are associated with rare diseases in India. Because first of all, as I've already highlighted, there's a lack of definition as far as rare diseases is concerned. Because first of all, WHO, it only highlights that has a different definition, and Indian government, it has a different definition. So this lack of proper definition, it creates challenges as far as identifying the rare diseases are concerned. And also these rare diseases, they are genetic in nature, thereby they have what is called as low onset. So people who are suffering from rare diseases, the symptoms actually takes time to come forward. So because of this, there has been a lack of awareness in general as far as people are concerned. Because people, they think that the symptoms which occur quite late as far as these rare diseases are concerned, people think that they might have occurred due to some trauma that a person may be facing. So thereby the awareness, not just in general public, but also in healthcare professional, is quite low as far as rare diseases in India are concerned. And this low awareness, it has created problems in adequately diagnosing these rare diseases. Because first of all, the professionals are not aware, and also the tools that are required to diagnose these diseases, they are not adequately developed. Now also people face severe limitations in accessing the facilities to cure or to reduce these rare diseases, because all over India there are as much as 450 odd diseases which are categorized as rare diseases. And out of these total of 450 diseases, about 20 diseases are treatable, and they can only be treated in center of excellences, which are only quite few. And when these center of excellences, they are located at far off locations, hence people who are facing from rare diseases, they have faced difficulties in accessing these very limited facilities. So not just awareness is low, diagnosis is also quite inadequate, and people who are diagnosed, they are also facing difficulties in accessing facilities for their day-to-day life. But also government, it is also giving lack of budgetary support as far as rare diseases are concerned. Because earlier I highlighted that as much as 8 to 10 crore people are suffering from rare diseases. So it requires a large budgetary support from the government. But in actually, the government, it is only providing about 93 crore rupees for treatment of rare diseases, which is quite low. Now also the utilization rate of this budgetary support has been also quite less, because out of 71 crores which was meant for establishing center of excellence, the government has only been able to utilize 41 crore. So you can see that there is a lack of utilization of limited budgetary support. So there are the challenges as far as rare diseases are concerned. And in this regard, the government, it has brought forward many interventions, and the details of these interventions have been provided in the PDF document. So please take a look at these interventions in the notes after the session ends. Now, what is the ideal way forward? First of all, there's a need to frame a standard definition of what are rare diseases. Because only when we frame standard definition, it will help create awareness, and it will also force the government to increase their budgetary support. Also, what we require is social assistance programs, because currently only center is giving funds to rare diseases. So the social assistance program can be taken with the help of state governments as well. And these state governments, they can also be encouraged to establish center of excellences. Further, there's currently a funding crunch, which you can see from the lack of budgetary support by the government. So to complement government efforts, we should also encourage private sector to provide funds under their corporate social responsibility initiatives. Further, these rare diseases, they require medicine which are currently not available in the market. So in this regard, government should incentivize drug manufacturers under PLI 2.0 scheme, which is there for pharma sector. So first, by framing a standard definition, then utilizing state government for establishing center of excellences, complementing the funds from private sector, as well as incentivizing drug manufacturing, will enable or will provide a better treatment to people who are suffering from rare diseases. And with this, let us move to the next article of the day, which appeared in the Indian Express Explain section. Now today is a 29th February, which you can understand is an extra day in the month of February, because this year is a 2024, which is a leap year. Now what is a leap year? Now usually there are 365 days in a year, but in leap year there are one extra days, thereby making this year 366 days long. Now, why was this leap year introduced in the first place? Because Earth, to rotate or to take one revolution of Sun, it requires some time, which is a common understanding that Earth requires 365 days to complete one revolution across the Sun. But is it correct? The answer is no. Why? Because in actual term, Earth takes 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes and 46 seconds to complete one revolution across the Sun. So to compensate this extra time, which is close to 6 hours, every 4 years we add 1 day to every year, because 6 hours into 4 gives 24 hours, which means 1 day. So this 1 day is added every 4 years, and this is known as a leap year. But you'll ask, is every 4 years a leap year? The answer again is no. Because as you can understand, Earth takes 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes and 46 seconds to complete one revolution across the Sun. But I rounded this figure off to 6 hours to conveniently calculate a leap year. So this extra hour, it is deducted from leap year. So it was decided that every year that ends with 00 at its end will not be designated as a leap year. But this again created some problems with the calculation. So again, it was highlighted that every year which is divisible by 400 will be counted as a leap year. And otherwise, the years will be deducted from the leap years. So in this regard, you can see that the year 1900, which is again divisible by 4, but not divisible by 400, it is not counted as a leap year. But on the other hand, the year 2000, it is calculated as a leap year. So this was the difference between what is known as a leap year and is every year or every 4 years a leap year. Now let us move to another article of the day which appeared in the Business Line newspaper. Now this article, it highlights that India is conducting a survey on multimodal lines which will link India's dedicated freight corridors. Now why are we asking a question or why are we discussing freight corridors? Because UPSC from time to time asks questions related to projects on connectivity, which is a recent question in the prelims of the year 2023. So let us understand what are these dedicated freight corridors. Now, naturally, every one of you must have traveled by trains. Now, you can witness on a same railway track, there's also a freight train and there's also a passenger train. But with increasing economy size and with increasing population, we require more and more passenger and freight transport. So, in this regard, government it estimated the increased demand, and government it created a dedicated lines for movement of freight trains, which are known as dedicated freight corridors. And currently under construction there are two freight corridors. One is the eastern freight corridors, which runs from Ludhiana in Punjab to Dankuni, which is located in West Bengal, and it travels through many Indian states, which you can see in the map that I've provided. Now, there's also another western dedicated freight corridor which connects Dadri to JNPT port in the west coast of the country. Now, these freight corridors, they are being constructed by Dedicated Freight Corridor Corporation of India Limited, which is a PSU under Ministry of Railways. Now, based on this question, let us solve the practice question that we have curated. With reference to dedicated freight corridor, consider the following statements. Eastern dedicated freight corridor, it connects Amritsar with Tinsukia. Now again, this statement is incorrect because as I've already highlighted, Eastern freight corridor, it connected Ludhiana, which is in Punjab, to Dankuni, which is in West Bengal, and this Tinsukia, it is located in state of Assam. So the first statement is incorrect. The second statement, Western dedicated freight corridor, it passes through Madhya Pradesh and Haryana. Now again, as you can see from this map, this Western freight corridor, it passes through Haryana, but it completely avoids Madhya Pradesh. Thereby the second statement is also incorrect. The third statement, Eastern dedicated freight corridor and Western dedicated freight corridor, they meet in Delhi, which again is an incorrect statement because these freight corridors, they meet in Khurja, which is located in Uttar Pradesh and not in Delhi. So the correct answer to this model question is option D. Now with this, let us move to the last article of the day, which again appeared in the Business Line newspaper. Now in this article, the CAG, he was addressing a conference and he highlighted the use of artificial intelligence for conducting audits of local government. Now, CAG is an important constitutional functionary, thereby it is important from GS paper to syllabus. Also in UPSC Prelims, especially in the year 2013, a question appeared on Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So this topic is important from both prelims and mains perspective. Now this CAG, it is an important constitutional functionary who is appointed by the President of India under his hand and seal. Now the term of this important functionary is that of 6 years or before he or she completes the age of 65 years, whichever is before. And can CAG automatically removed by the central government? The answer again is no. Because CAG can only be removed in a manner which is same as that of Supreme Court judge. Which means that any resolution which is brought in a parliament to remove CAG, it has to be passed by what is known as special majority. Which means that the resolution, it has to be voted by 2/3 of members who are present and voting. Now what are important duties and powers of CAG? Now in this regard, CAG, he conducts audits of central as well as state government, and also it also conducts audit of various bodies which are directly funded by these two governments. Also, on request of President and Governor, the CAG also conducts audit for local bodies which are Panchayati Raj institutions as well as urban local bodies. So these are main or important powers of CAG. Now also, I've provided an elaborate set of various duties and powers of CAG which you can refer to at the end of the session. Now, before ending the session, let us solve the model question. With reference to Comptroller and Auditor General of India, consider the following statements. The first statement, once appointed, the CAG can only be removed by President on the basis of resolution passed by President with simple majority, which makes the statement incorrect because I have already highlighted that resolution to remove CAG it requires to be passed by special and not simple majority. Again, the second statement, he shall not be eligible for further office under Government of India or any state after he has ceased to be holding his office, which is a correct statement because to ensure independence of CAG, it has been added to the Act of CAG that he or she should not be eligible to hold any office, be it union government or state government. So the answer to this practice question is option B because only statement 2 was correct. Now also, as I've already highlighted, the article on irregularities in vertical devolution, it was dealt in detail by me in the DNS of 7th of February, where I highlighted not just issues related to vertical devolution, but also issues related to horizontal devolution. So you can refer to the DNS of 7th of February to know more about issues related to fiscal federalism in India. And also, there was this important article in I Explain section which highlighted the importance of creating India's genetic map. Now, I did not pick up this article today because it was covered by us only yesterday. As you can see, Pooja ma'am on yesterday highlighted the importance of creating India's genetic map. So please refer to these two DNSs for more and greater understanding. And with this, I conclude our today's session of Daily News Simplified. So we'll see you again tomorrow at 6. And until then, I wish you a very good night.